They sell art supply stores. That was like the most sought after, like in the day anyway. When Montana first came out, graffiti artists were always trying to steal Montana. Like they never, real graffiti artists never paid for any of their spray paint, so they were always like breaking into art supply stores and stealing it. But so there's Montana, but there's also like, this might just be Krylon, like acrylic latex spray paint. And if you spray paint on and then you just let it sit for a moment and then you wipe it, the mist dries really fast, but the center will wipe out. So I'm able to create these sort of halos, and I've always been interested in that sort of visual static. I mean, people will talk about it as distress. It's not really distress, but it's about that idea of, I think one of the things I love about that sort of antique look, things that look old, is that there's this level of sort of interference, like there's a history built up on a thing. Like if you buy an old frame, it's so much different physically. The presence of it is so much different from a new frame because it has a patina, it has age. And so, and I don't care that it's about age so much, though that's interesting to me. I care more about the fact that it has this physical presence, like something's happened, that there's been this history. I don't care if the history is 100 years old or 2 days or an hour. It looks like something's happened. It's transformed somehow from just wood, or from just a varnished surface. So I'm always interested in that in paintings and creating not necessarily something that looks like an antique, but something that looks like it has this accrual of like patina or involvement somehow, that it has that resonant quality of, not that I'm trying to make it look antique, but I'm trying to look like there's some history there. Even if it's just the history of me messing with it. So, as if they're, these little theatrical sort of like stage sets, or they're in some ways they're sort of operatic, or like these sort of enchanted stage sets. And so I'm not really so interested in creating absolutely like infinite space. I'm interested in creating a space for the sort of central drama to take place in. For the event to happen, a sort of narrative moment that exists at, the moment of the painting, the narrative moment of that piece needs to have an environment to exist in. And sometimes they're more or less developed. This happens to be maybe more developed, but the really abstract treatment of the background where there's just all that dripping paint, which really becomes like, foliage or something, or like willows or rain, or I don't know what it is exactly.
And that's the spray paint that's up at the top that's running.
No, that's not spray paint.
No,
that's just regular paint. That's just been really watered and sort of just sort of like a bar of paint across the top, and then super saturated so that it would drip with just water. And then painted over, and then the spray paint are just those glowing orbs.
And then the title?
Well, I think we talked about that. The whole idea of I kept thinking about Los Angeles when I was doing this, and I realized that people probably look at this and think, what does this have to do with the La Brea tar pits? But I was always taken with the idea that when you go by the La Brea tar pits, there's those animals like coming out of the bubbling pit, and sometimes you can still see the tar bubble up. And I love the fact that at a Natural History Museum, or is it the Natural History Museum? What's that museum called? The one with the dinosaur stuff, right at the tar pits.
Yeah, it's the Museum of Natural History.
Museum of Natural History. It's got those great old dinosaur dioramas and things in there, or paintings, murals. And so there was something about, I always felt, Milwaukee has a beautiful museum that has really beautifully painted murals and dioramas, and there was always something that I found, again, very enchanted, very magical about those kind of spaces. So I was sort of thinking about that, my interest in that growing up, and those kind of, because in some ways they're very imaginary things, like we don't really know what, like when these artists would create those, like, they were fantasy paintings of like what it was like, the time of the dinosaurs. So they're completely enchanted, made up magical paintings. And that was a huge influence on me as a kid. So somehow I was thinking the shows are coming up in Los Angeles. There's the La Brea tar pits, this idea of growing up in natural history museums. As a kid, Milwaukee's very sort of magical, enchanted natural history museum, which you should really see sometime. It's fantastic. It's like a little jewel. It's so weird. It's all made by artists. Like it was all made by these, professional artists back in the day. All the dioramas were designed by them. But, and then thinking of the idea of like, what are the tar pits? Here were these things where all these animals were trapped and it did preserve their skeletons, but essentially the fact that oil and swamps and marshes is where the beginnings of fossilization and death and decay and everything that later becomes oil happens. the beginnings of that sort of historical geologic process. And so I was thinking, like, here's, if you're thinking about like the dream of infinity, right, or the dream of eternity, the dream of an afterlife, and then I thought, like, how do you counter that? It's like, what would be like the realist's sort of dream of that sort of encounter with long history? Instead of dreaming of like becoming what? I don't know, spirit, it would be like the dream of becoming oil. like that's like your afterlife.
There you go.
So, I mean, so the title is sort of tongue-in-cheek, obviously. But I do think it's like, I kind of felt like I had to use a title like that was sort of smart-ass a little bit, that had a little sort of a banal edge to it, because the painting is so, for me, I really felt like it was almost Disney for me. It had become so sort of about, fairyland in a way. And I was like, wow, what is happening? And then I just sort of, I do kind of love it. And I guess it's still plenty weird enough, but I don't know. I guess I just felt like it needed something that sort of counter all that sort of happy baby and happy animals. It's a little Bambi.
It is. It is.
Though, definitely not exactly cute. It's still odd. I mean, all the animals are quirky. They're all pretty much all invented. I didn't look at anything when I was painting them. They're all about the idea of things. It's like, I don't know what spiders really look like. Like, clearly that's not like a real spider. And flying squirrels, like, I don't have any idea. I don't know what that is. It's like, okay, they have sort of a furry tail. The bat, it's like completely made up. Even the owl, it's sort of very streamlined. I have no idea what that creature is. Like clearly that's a snake, but not like any snake I've ever seen. So yeah, it's all just, products of the imagination.
So one of the things that I've noticed about all of the creatures in these pieces are their eyes.
Oh yeah,
They
they all have
really,
human eyes.
they're more than human. They're like,
Well, they're stylized now. They're
Yeah.
very almond shaped. They're almost like Egyptian eyes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I've done. It's weird, that happens in my work. Like, I'll do a piece that becomes very naturalistic. Like, I'll actually look at something, like maybe my own face, and say, and then I'll just sort of won't do that for a long time. And then you find yourself just sort of, this is the way I want an eye to look. So it's sort of like that. They're idealized eyes, and they all have the same eyes. In fact, I'm willing to bet that all of these, I think, have green eyes. No, he has little tiny brown eyes, I think. Green, brown.
but most of them have green.
Yeah, a lot of them have green eyes. I thought the green, because of the sort of bluish cast of all of this, I didn't want to give them blue eyes. So there might be a couple of blue eyes here. They almost always have blue or green eyes, occasionally brown eyes, and that's just a reference to me. It's just a way of saying, this is me, these are my eyes, and so.
Okay. And they're very arresting. They really, grab onto you when you look at the piece.
Yeah, I think, that's why all the animals have human eyes, because if you gave them the sort of round animal eyes, they kind of, it's like teddy bear eyes,
Yeah.
there's nothing going on there.
Right.
It's hard to really engage with them on a psychological level. If you're looking at animal eyes, like dog eyes maybe, but, so many animals, like, especially wild animals, have that kind of blank eye thing. I'm not saying they're stupid, but they don't look human. They don't, it's really difficult to engage with animals' psychology, I think, at least through their eyes. Through their behavior you can, but not through their eyes. So that I give them all human eyes. I've always done that.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me about, the weeping, and I know that the weeping Santos and that sort of has been a recurring theme. They have these
I gotta be honest with you and tell you that sometimes they just need it.
Yeah.
It's almost like putting jewelry on them. It's like, would you go out without your earrings? Would you? I'm just asking you.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Depends on where I'm going.
me too,
Probably not.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go out without my earrings, like here I went out without my earrings. It's like, I really sometimes feel like it's like, sometimes they need that little bit of ornamentation.
Okay.
That's on top of what I said about them symbolically. Like, I really think the symbolism is what it is, that all the water symbolism that's in the word is, pretty apparent. But I've always used them, they started out because of the whole weeping Madonna and thing, and I grew up as a Catholic, and in church I was an altar boy and was in a Sicilian family, so they were always talking about these sort of miraculous events and weeping statues, and I found it all very creepy when I was a kid, but it was embedded, and even my teachers would tell me stories about bleeding, this and that, and weeping things. And in fact, did I tell you the story about my sister? When I was in 4th grade, and my oldest sister was in 8th grade, And I used to stare at the 8th grade girls during mass. We had morning mass every day before school. And because, you know, they were like women, right? They were in 8th grade, but the 4th grade kid was like, oh, there's all the girls. They had boobs. So I just stare at them. I didn't know what the hell was going on up on the altar. I'd just be staring at the girls. And then one day, halfway through the mass, and they were right up in the front of the church, and right in front of them, the 8th grade girls, was a statue of the Madonna. And one of them just goes, oh, and like passes out. Her head actually hits the pew. She actually faints, right? And I thought, oh, somebody didn't eat their breakfast. You know, I didn't know what happened. But then they started dropping like flies. All the girls started passing out. They started swooning. Well, apparently, they claimed later, when they got them all together, that they had had this sort of mass hallucination. They had all claimed to have seen the statue of the Madonna smile at them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, they actually called the bishop.
The smile of the Madonna.
Well, I wasn't looking at the Madonna. I was like, looking at like Susie Strandy's boobs, probably, you know. So and then she fainted. I was like, what the hell? But you know, I was probably at one moment was like, oh, you know, the Catholic guilt. I probably thought somehow I did it, like the power of my like 4th grade like imagination and made them knock them out with like X-ray vision. But they actually called the bishop, like the archbishop or something, in to investigate, and they just wrote it off to adolescent hysteria, you know, girls to overactive hormones.
Oh,
So,
boy.
yeah. But, so anyway, it comes from that. But it also comes from the fact that, by and large, in my paintings, they're not doing much. Most of my characters are just sort of sitting around. I mean, even here, he's sort of riding. I guess this deer sort of has agency, you know, it's kind of moving. I guess you could say it's swimming. But mostly it's sort of a static scene always. It's like a moment, and it's sort of trapped, like in like the mosquito in the amber, you know, there's like this moment where it's all trapped. There's not like big melodramatic action. Nobody's like, even if they're like fighting, it's all sort of very posed. That's just the way I like it. I want them to have, because if you create like a giant melodramatic like action scene, it's no longer like an icon. It's something else now. It's a different kind of thing, and I'm very drawn to the idea of the icon and the kind of iconic quality. So lacking a lot of other action, what's a way to represent sort of internal, you know, emotion, psychological states? And I used to call it leaking. I'd make the figures leak. So like that's why it's not just always tears. Sometimes it's coming out, you know, their mouths, they're crying, stuff's coming out of their ears, they're bleeding. They're immersed in water. And water has been such a constant in the work, though it's really an issue in this show. But I've always been drawn to that because I always think of water as being somehow, you know, it's very symbolic of like the womb, obviously, but it's also really symbolic of sort of the psyche. Water it's like a huge symbol in sort of dream analysis as being representative of sort of the ocean. It's like the ocean of the mind. It's the psyche. So when you see things leaking or bubbles or water or sprays, it's like the psyche sort of leaking out or emerging. I mean, at least that's how I think of it. And then this whole thing with this really restrained palette has very much to do with an actual phenomenon. If you're in the northern, you know, latitudes, and I found this from growing up hunting in the woods, you would see as the sun would set, while you're still able to see everything, the first thing that happens as the light is failing is the color starts to drain out of everything. It's sort of in the northern forest, everything becomes sort of monochromatic before the lights go out completely. And it's this slow, drawn-out process of twilight where you're still able to see quite well, but the colors are gone. And it's sort of, they actually refer to that as the sort of the magic hour, you know, where it's very ethereal sort of time. So this is all that sort of twilight, you know, just moments before or just moments after night falls.
So you have to tell us a little bit about Popo.
Popo was my Boston Terrier, our Boston Terrier, who died last year. She had, well, she was 13 years old, but she had thyroid cancer, and she just was a member of the family. But she was, you know, a little Boston Terrier. I mean, I modified it. Boston Terriers don't have ears like that. I made her sort of a little helmet head. She's almost more of a monkey. But that's very, you know, except for the pattern, it sort of seems like it has Popo's sort of, you know, it's like Popo's spirit. It's like the ghost of Popo. So, you know, you changed once you die. You're not exactly the same. It's not exactly a portrait. It's a portrait of, yeah, you know, post-life, the angel purple.
That's it.
That's why it has little sort of twinkling stars. And
Yeah.
I think that was the first one where I used that sort of grisaille, glued down, sort of silvery palette because of that silver frame. I had the frame, and I had a panel cut for it, and it was the first thing that made me think of that. And then right after that, I started working on that big piece, and it led to all of these sort of, the same sort of silvery bluish palette.
It's really beautiful. It really feels like cool and
Yeah,
crisp.
I just think and it looks great. I mean, sometimes things like that can feel sort of arid, like cold, like brittle, but it doesn't have that. Like, even though they're cool, they have a kind of warmth to them, I think. And a part of it is, I think, this sort of soft, like, enchanted quality. I mean, I feel like it worked.
Oh,
But it was a bit of an experiment. But I'm glad it kind of came together as a show. I think it looks good. And I feel like that little bear is like so much about regret. Like he knows he needs that, but
Oh, you're so sweet.
yeah,
yeah.
he has to kill that fish to live, but he's not happy about it.
The emotions of these are
Yeah,
so...
I think they're all very emotional,
They
yeah.
are.
I mean, I think the work's always been emotional, but it's maybe more so. Like, I mean, definitely would say my heart is on my sleeve more in these new works.
You're like
think I'm just-
empathetic.
Yeah, they're very
That's-
empathetic, I think.
yeah.
That's a good word. Yeah, I think I like that a lot, that idea that they exude sort of an empathetic quality. Yeah. I mean, I would hope so. I think that's so not cool, like people don't. Like, I'm okay with that. I'm good with it. I think it's a good thing. In fact, I talk to my students all the time about how there's something about this new generation of kids that's actually very sincere. Like I grew up at a time in the 80s when like nobody was sincere. I mean, I was, but most art was about being ironic, totally insincere and crass and commercial and like how much money can I make as fast as I can. It was very much like the sort of Wall Street model of being an artist. And then that sort of died off for a little while, and then it came back again, in the 90s, and then it came back again after 2000, and sort of always comes back. It's sort of the ugly kind of, just the crassly commercial side of the art world. And in some ways, the sort of critical side of the art world where people act like anything like a true emotion or real emotion or like real human psychology is not cool. I just don't care. I mean, if I had to make work like that, I'd rather sell insurance. If I'm going to be a bitch, I'd rather do some kind of bitch work. I don't want to make art. I mean, I actually feel like there's a spiritual component to what I do. So yeah, like if I couldn't make work that had that sort of empathy, I don't think I'd make it. So yeah, you hope that's in there, right?
I think you feel it, and I think that's the warmth that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's it. I think it does. The palette may be kind of cool, but I think that you're right, that
Yeah.
it's that emotional sort of psychological tone is what